Hey everybody, it's John from Humor and History. In this episode, we have the fascinating history of England and Portugal's 650-year alliance. I am fascinated with this, actually, so it's a good word to use. I find it amazing that such an alliance has taken place, especially amongst, great powers like this. And I think it's something that you guys ought to be proud of, so let's get into it.
England was in the midst of the Hundred Years' War, pursuing Edward III's claim to the French crown. So why was an alliance with Portugal thought necessary, especially an alliance that pledged military aid? After all, Portugal is a very long way from France.
To find out, I've come to meet an historian who has studied these events, Antonio Oliveira.
England didn't have a standing navy at the time, as you know. It relied on merchant vessels, cogs usually, outfitted for naval warfare. Portugal, on the other hand, had one of the very best navies in medieval Europe.
And that mattered to England.
I did want to pause because I was just thinking that. I'm like, they're both are seafaring nations, so this could be a really a grand alliance.
Because Portugal's neighbour, Castile, had allied itself with France. Spain had not yet emerged as a nation. Castile was Portugal's largest neighbour and also a belligerent rival.
The Castilian navy was also pretty powerful and was of considerable benefit to France. The English derived a lot of their wealth from trade with Portugal, which was being disrupted by Castilian raiding.
England's King Edward also needed safe passage for his armies across the English Channel to the fighting in France.
Of course,
both
that
England and Portugal had pressing strategic interests for an alliance against this Franco-Castilian threat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The alliance was also motivated by the personal ambitions of one man, John of Gaunt.
Never heard of him.
King Edward III of England's third son, was a major power player and the chief broker of the alliance. By marriage, he was a claimant to the Castilian crown, a claim that Portugal supported.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. Okay.
Further uphold that claim, an expeditionary force numbering 3,000 men was sent from England to Portugal in 1381. Its twin aims were to defend the border and to press Gaunt's quest to become the King of Castile.
See, that's interesting because all right, so they're pushing the Moors out of Iberia, and Portugal emerges as a state. Well, a state, an entity, I guess. This is my limited American knowledge. By the way, I am doing this channel to learn. Okay, so I see how this is going out. So, okay, they want to support that. Yep, makes sense.
Tragically, this mercenary army were a poorly led, unruly and disreputable mob. Many were former criminals and only there for the plunder.
So they're Australian?
There were reports of looting and atrocities by the English against the Portuguese population. It was an inauspicious start to the alliance.
It is tough to send out expeditionary forces. They do have to be very disciplined, especially if it's a standing army. I don't know if this was part of the standing army, but there's a book written on this, the beginning of the 20th century, so a long time ago.
However, 3 years later, on the 14th of August 1385, the English had the chance to redeem themselves by providing critical support to Portugal at the Battle of Aljubarrota. They were up against a fearsome enemy.
Castile's ally France had joined the fray and sent a massive army in support of the invasion. It included over 2,000 heavy cavalry. Can you imagine that? 2,000 powerful snorting horses, over 2,000 powerful men glinting in plate armor. It was a seemingly unstoppable force.
Heavy cavalry is just that. Heavy cavalry. Kind of reminds me of the Napoleonic the Napoleonic era, when England also came to Portugal's aid. Yeah.
Portugal had a new king, King João.
I should say I guess it was not only aid to Portugal, but aid to against I guess it was with Spain against France. So
Portrayed in this painting meeting with John of Gaunt. João had mustered an army of around 6,000 men to face the threat. However, he was severely outmatched by a Franco-Castilian army of a little over 20,000 men. He was outnumbered by more than 3 to 1. In support of Portugal, John of Gaunt sent a contingent of English knights together with around 600 longbowmen. French cavalry had good reason to fear the power of English longbowmen. They had felt their sting nearly 40 years earlier at the Battle of Crécy.
the longbowmen, that England, I guess, had. It was England at this time. Yeah, they were quite good. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the English invented the longbow.
And again, a decade later at Poitiers.
Even so, 2,000 horses, which is what the French had at Aljubarrota, should have had no trouble riding down a few hundred archers, flattening them like trampled corn. But they didn't, and they couldn't, and the reason is this.
The archers had defended their positions with a minefield of pits.
Ooh, brilliant.
Tell me about the pits. The pits were important at Aljubarrota.
Yeah, they were very important. The archaeological excavations at the battle site have revealed hundreds of pits, almost like this, a little bit deeper.
A bit deeper.
Sometimes with a stake in the middle. And
Oh, yeah.
these pits were laid out in front of what we now know to have been the archers' positions.
Any horse coming through here, even at this depth, is going to break a leg, throw the rider.
And the psychological effect
Yeah.
of this was that the entire Franco-Castilian army was funneled towards this very narrow front. Only the men in front could fight, and this not only negated their advantage in numbers.
Because of the crowding from the back.
Precisely.
Sure.
If you force them into a funnel,
Yeah, there's
they're
pressing,
pushing.
there's chaos, and we know, for example, that a lot of the Castilian dead were found without any wounds on their bodies. They died from compression.
Compression. So yeah, that's an amazing thing. I didn't even know. First of all, I didn't even really know about this battle. Actually, I don't know if I've ever even heard of it. But yeah, if you can get your enemy to funnel, you can equalize numbers, and it happened in a number of circumstances. I'm thinking about the Greeks, the Battle of what was it, Marathon, and yeah.
Fighting began at 10 o'clock in the morning and went on until nightfall. Throughout the day, there were many twists and turns, but in the end, the tactics and the fighting grit of the smaller force prevailed, and King João, with English support, won the day.
in England, Aljubarrota is one of the lesser-known battles of the 100 Years' War. But how much did the outcome matter to England?
It was
Thank God, because I was like, I don't really know this battle.
absolutely vital in ensuring the safety of England as an independent kingdom. Had Juan of Castile won at Aljubarrota, then the Portuguese and Castilian thrones would have been united under the same ruler, who was allied with Valois France. That would have meant that the French would have had at their disposal the combined might of the Portuguese and Castilian navies, which in turn would mean an unimaginable land invasion of England, for certain.
So, if I get this straight, this essentially asserted or enabled Portugal to become stay an independent state. Sorry, this is live. I don't cut this stuff out.
And we know that that invasion was being planned. In fact, in the very same day that the Treaty of Windsor was signed, the Portuguese pledged to send the English war galleys to patrol the Channel in anticipation of a possible invasion.
The value of the alliance had been proven, and its pledges continued. Among them, a declaration for true, mutual, and perpetual friendships and leagues of sincere affection. In the following year, 1386, King João was married to John of Gaunt's daughter, Philippa of Lancaster. They were married in Porto Cathedral.
That's cool. I love the alliances.
The marriage is
the marriage alliance.
commemorated in a rather surprising setting. This is Porto's São Bento train station. It is famous for its azulejo tiles depicting important moments in Portuguese history.
These tiles behind me here commemorate the celebrations after the ceremony. Here you can see King João and his new queen, Philippa, both crowned, riding side by side as equals through the streets of Porto to cheering crowds. It was the beginning of a new era. And Queen Philippa was popular in her new country. She had the ear of the king, she was influential, and she was powerful. And I love it that this English noblewoman, who few in England have even heard of, is seen here every day by thousands of commuters and tourists. It's a
Very
strong
cool.
image and an enduring legacy.
This guy's kind of interesting. Ah,
Following the marriage, the alliance was bolstered by the Treaty of Windsor, signed at Windsor Castle in England. This secured even stronger guarantees
Windsor Castle is that old. That's right. I didn't know it was that prominent even then. Okay.
of military aid. Moreover, Queen Philippa promoted trade between England and Portugal, increasing the commercial ties that endure to this day.
Yeah. That's neat. That's
Here on the waterfront in Porto, there would have been a fleet of small trading vessels, and just imagine it. There would also have been a noisy, toiling legion of dock workers as they heaved and hauled and loaded and unloaded their cargoes amidst the shouts and cries of merchants haggling for better prices. Tin, alabaster, card, wool and woolen cloth. These were the staples of the English, and for the Portuguese it was oranges and leather and olive oil and wine.
I have to say, he really does put everything into context for understanding, especially for, dumb Americans like myself. But one of the things that I find interesting, and this is just a side note, is that a lot of Americans live in the present and they don't consider the context of what things were like and how people may have thought and lived further in the past. We don't have a long history, but we do have a celebrated history, I guess. But I think you guys do a much better job here in Europe and the UK of understanding or explaining how things are in the context of the time period. And a lot of people don't do that in the States. They do it for certain things like our Civil War. That's a big thing. And yeah.
Despite the longevity of the alliance, there have been bumps in the road. For 60 years, between 1580 and 1640, Portugal was under Spanish rule, a period when Spain was in conflict with England.
Okay.
There were 12 Portuguese ships in the Spanish Armada that attempted, unsuccessfully, an invasion of England in 1588.
I didn't know that.
The following year, Sir Francis Drake led a privately financed expedition to destroy the remnants of the Armada ships that had made it home. Those who signed up were promised a share of the treasure. After raiding Corunna, where they sank 13 ships, this mercenary force of privateers moved on to Lisbon. Drake blockaded the harbour so that no ships could get in or out of Lisbon, and another English force, one that had landed further north, came overland to attack the city.
Okay.
11,000 men under English command attacked Lisbon. It was argued that it would prompt a Portuguese uprising against their Spanish overlords, but that didn't materialize. Lisbon's garrison of 7,000 Portuguese and Spanish troops held out. Once again, the Castelo São Jorge was a vital bastion of defense.
Huh.
Its long-range guns pounding the English raiders over a mile away.
Wow. 1680. Okay.
In 1640, Portugal's independence and its monarchy were restored.
Okay,
In
1640.
1660, the monarchy was also restored in Britain with the crowning of King Charles II.
Timing. Now
And
I
in
understand.
the following year, The Portuguese-British alliance received a considerable boost with the marriage of Charles to Portugal's Catherine of Braganza. As part of her dowry, the Portuguese territory of Bombay, present-day Mumbai, was gifted to the king. Charles, in turn, gifted it to the East India Company, thus beginning a new chapter of British interest in India.
Holy cow! I had no idea Portugal had this much of a role in the beginning of the in British East India.
Tea was not yet grown in India. At the time, tea came only from China.
Right.
Everyone knows about us Brits and our obsession with tea, but it was Catherine of Braganza who first made tea drinking fashionable in Britain. You see, the Portuguese had been trading with China since the early 16th century, and they developed their passion for tea long before the British.
Well, that's cool. I had no idea.
However, few things characterize the bond between Britain and Portugal more than the trade and consumption of port wine. Portuguese wine had been traded for centuries, but it was events in 1667 that spurred the development of port wine as we know it today. A trade war had resulted in a ban on the import of French wines into Britain.
The British needed to source their wine from elsewhere, and British merchants already living in Portugal were quick to supply the demand. This is Taylor's Port Lodge, where casks of port are stored for aging. Cristo, bom dia.
To me, this is interesting because I have friends. I'm friends with a particular YouTube channel that, and I don't remember what their handle name is. They've purchased a winery out in Portugal, in the central area, but east of Lisbon, and I love watching them do the restoration work on it.
Quite an art to moving these barrels, and he makes it look incredibly easy.
Yeah, he does.
Taylor's is one of the original port houses, tracing its history back to 1692, and I've come here today to meet its managing director, Adrian Bridge.
Portugal was shipping wine to England. In the early days, it was something called Red Portugal. And I have a sort of example of it here. It was much lighter wine that was made sort of up in the northern part of Portugal. Try some.
He looks important.
I mean, to me, that's an extremely pleasant red wine, but not yet port.
It's not yet port. It's a much lighter example. It's what would have been traded in the mid-17th century after Oliver Cromwell's treaty with Portugal, where wool and wines were being traded between Britain and Portugal. And the people were on the coast making this lighter style of wine. It took a few years before they discovered the big, powerful wines of the Douro.
Which is what the British market wanted.
British market were looking for a bit more strength, a little bit more fruit, a little bit more richness. And by going into the interior of the country, you've got riper grapes, bigger fruit, and therefore the capacity to make much more powerful wines.
Portugal's Douro Valley is where the grapes are grown to make true port wines. The valley sits the other side of the Marão mountain range in Portugal's interior. It has an entirely different climate from the coastal vineyards, with bitterly cold winters and searingly hot summers. This produces grapes with extra thick skins. These retain more sugar, resulting in a robust, rich and sweet wine with a high alcohol content.
Interesting.
Apart from the quality of the grapes, what makes port is that it is a fortified wine. Brandy is
I'm never going to get over people using their feet to crush grapes.
added to the mix.
Well, that is pretty much it. I thought it would be a little more factual and in-depth. Instead, it was more of a documentary style. It is interesting, though, that, just the longevity of the whole thing. Pretty much stopped there and ended with a wine alliance. Didn't get into didn't get into Napoleon or anything like that, unless I'm missing a section of the video. But anyway, it's already at 20 minutes. Let me know down below. Guys, I'm always learning, and I do make mistakes when I speak sometimes in these live recordings. So let me know what you think. What did you think of the narrator? I thought he was interesting, and I actually learned quite a bit. So now I know a lot more about Portugal, but I still feel like I'm missing a whole lot, like since wine. So let me know.